Good morning. My name is Jim Buchanan. I'm the High Counselor for the South Stake, and one of my responsibilities is to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. This morning, you're in for a real treat. We have been able to arm twist. No, they really just offered. Two, I'm going to call them my friends. We haven't known each other that long, but they have so much knowledge that it's benefiting all of us. This morning, first you'll hear from Brother Bill Tolbert. Bill is the regional representative for the church in Volunteers Active in Disasters. He has an extensive background in law enforcement, emergency management, emergency preparedness, and now he's taken on, as he told me earlier this morning, he has failed Retirement 101 and he's still working on it. He's now been called to assist the region, which is Cache, Box Elder, and Weber, in getting our stakes and wards up to snuff where we need to be, not only in individual preparedness, but how does the stake respond? How do the wards respond? Should we have an event? The second friend, who I've known a little less, but has knowledge way beyond my pay grade, is Don Summit. Don has been called as a regional communications, I'm going to call you a consultant. And his task is to make sure we can communicate, not only from wards to stakes, but from stakes, to regions, but to the area 70s and ultimately to Salt Lake. And we found that when we looked at it, we had a couple of missing wires. So we're trying to adapt that system, and I'm a paper, let me borrow your calendar a minute. Just to give you an idea how busy he is, I believe in paper. This is his calendar of what he's doing. There's a lot of people want what he has to talk about, what to do, as with Bill. These two have helped me immensely with taking the church side of it and making it work. I spent years doing the government side, but doing the church side is a little different. So you don't want to listen to me, you came to listen to them, so I'll turn the time over to Bill and then to Don.
Thank you. He said we're friends. I thought we were brothers from other mothers, but then maybe I'm wrong there. And I wanted to thank Bill Vi for coming up from Weber County and attending today as well. We're going to talk about this topic that you've heard a lot about for decades now, but I'm going to put some pieces together and I'm going to share some information with you that you probably haven't seen before when we talk about preparedness. We're going to look at preparedness both from an individual, a family, and a community, which for us might be a church community. Normally I ask what comes to mind when we talk about emergency preparedness, and I'll pick people in the audience, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to tell you what the normal high answers are. Food storage, everybody thinks food storage. Water storage, 72-hour kits, financial stability kind of gets in there sometimes, and emergency communications more and more has come to the forefront in what people think right away, because I think they've found some gaps in that area. So what's normally missing? Evacuation plans and reuniting plans, which are critically important. I've worked now for over a dozen years in emergency response and recovery. And when I see the terror written on people's faces, it's because they didn't do the basics of getting prepared. They never thought they would ever be called to evacuate, and they weren't all together when it happened. And we'll talk about some of those things here. We're going to talk about shelter in place and sheltering operations. By the way, let me touch on that. The Red Cross, American Red Cross, will actually bring out instructors to help your stakes learn how to operate their own buildings as shelters in an emergency. It's great training and can get your stake center or your ward building certified as shelters. Backup power becoming more and more sensitive issue, but how to deal with it when minutes of outage become hours, become days, become weeks or longer than that. And we've seen many of those in the past couple of years that have impacted thousands of people, even in Cache County here. We had a couple of outages in the past year and a half, 2 years that impacted thousands, luckily for short periods of time. But you got to think about those things. Special needs. If you've got somebody in your family like grandma and grandpa, or people on oxygen concentrators or on mobility devices that weigh 250 pounds and have to be running to be able to be usable. Here a few years ago, I can't remember, 4 years ago back when they had a big wildfire in Boulder, Colorado, they showed this family evacuating through a canopy of flames in their car, and literally flames going up both sides. And I talked to that family when I saw the news report, and the true story was that they evacuated without very much problem at all when they were told to evacuate, and then they forgot, good grief, we forgot the 2 family dogs. They went back to get the dogs, and by the time they loaded the dogs and their food, the fire had jumped over the roadway and the canopy of trees were on fire. So thinking about your pets, thinking about family members, what special needs do you have is an important part of your family planning. Disaster skills training. I saw somebody wearing a CERT shirt in the hall. That's one way you can get outstanding training. I've helped build CERT teams in Colorado, one in Cache Valley that's got 80 credentialed, certified, graduated CERT technicians, and probably 4 different ones in the state of Colorado. You can also get CPR and first aid training from the Red Cross, another flag on the Red Cross, and those are really good. We did CPR training for kids. Only kids could do it in one event like you're having here today in this building. And I listened to 8 and 10-year-olds as they were leaving the building saying, wow, now I know how to save mom and dad, because they learned CPR, they learned to stop the bleeding, first aid. So it's something that they really are tuned to and would help. Safety and security training is important. How not to put a target on your back. You're either going to be a resource or a victim. If you're not aware of your surroundings, if you're not safe in what you do and how you do it, you become another victim instead of a resource. And then community involvement. There are a lot of different community roles, and we'll talk about some of those in a minute. So I'm going to build the rules of 3 for you. There are 3 emergency time frames. Before the bad thing happens, and the things you can do to get prepared is called preparedness. When the bad thing hits, it's called emergency response. If it's going to be a long-term impact, like we saw the wildfires that hit Boulder a year and a half, 2 years ago, it might be 6 or 8 years before life gets back to the norm in that community. And that's called emergency recovery. And you'll see first 72 hours of response. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. But it's when, figuratively speaking, they roll the fire hoses up and get back to the station. You can have 3 different preparedness levels: an individual, a group, which could be a family, could be you and the people that you work with in an office setting, or another you and your neighbors kind of a group. And then it's the community. And you want a whole community response. You'll see a little brochure in the lower left-hand corner that FEMA puts out on a whole community response. A dozen years ago when I started, people would wait for FEMA to show up and be here and be in charge and solve our problems. And everybody learned really quick that doesn't work. They don't know the lay of the land, they don't know the critical geography, they don't know where the resources are or aren't, who has what, they don't know the key players, and they backed away from being the ones who parachuted in during emergencies to the ones that generally come a week to 10 days or more later than what the event was that happened. And that's called the whole community response, because they found the best way to respond to a disaster, flood, wildfire, earthquake, tornado, any of those, and I've been involved in all of those, is as a community locally, being able to be prepared, start up and deal with that. So those are the basic threes in the beginning. Then there's responders. You have local, which is your local emergency manager. You have county, which is Mark Millett. I don't see Mark in the room here, but he's in the building, I know. And then you have the state, which is the Division of Emergency Management, Salt Lake, about 5 blocks from church headquarters down there. And then you've also got the federal level, which is FEMA. There are 3 assets in an emergency: a prepared individual, a prepared group, and a prepared community partnered with emergency managers. I wish I could put a P on there that was as big as the rest of the text, because partnering is what it's all about. You don't want to be meeting people for the first time in the middle of a disaster, trying to get people's phone numbers and trying to find out who's who and what are their roles. And my last line on there is the one I want you to remember. You can either be a resource or you can be a victim. If you're not prepared, if you haven't had any training, if you don't know what to think about and what your first responses, automatic responses are, like muscle memory almost, you're going to be a victim. And the fewer victims you have, the better off you'll be. So I'm going to paint a disaster scenario, and I always watch some others twitch on this one. It happens at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on a Friday afternoon. It impacts a wide area, which includes your home area. You are at work or a store. The yellow tape has gone up. You can't get through. You can't get home. Your cell phone, which is a great asset normally, doesn't work because cell towers are overloaded or down. They burn down. They fall over. They float away. They're not that durable. You can make cell phone calls, but all you get is voicemail. And stake and leaders aren't available. And the emergency preparedness plan, I use Joplin, Missouri as the example. They took pride in having a great couple of binders in the clerk's office in the stake center of a plan till the tornado hit and left it 3 foot of rubble for the entire stake center. Then they didn't have a plan, and there wasn't anybody that knew it well enough to know what was in it, why it was in there, what they would do for the next step. So if 3:10 in the afternoon, if you have young teenage daughters, 13, 14, 15, and they're trying to figure out where to go, and a guy in a pickup truck pulls up and says, "Hey, jump in with me, I'll get you to safety." Does that make you cringe a little bit in the world we live in? Okay, so having a plan helps them understand what they should do, what they shouldn't do, what's safe and what is unsafe. Oops, sorry. So why is it that we believe these things here? Bad things are never going to happen to good people. Because it's mind-boggling to me, because bad things happen to good people all the time. If you're walking in a lightning storm and you don't know how to stay away from tall trees and other metal structures, you're going to become a victim. So it's the knowledge that differentiates you, because rain, I think it says somewhere in the scriptures, rain falls on all men equally. The disaster won't be directly where we are. It'll be on the other side of town. It'll be some other stake. I interviewed stake presidents when I came into Cache County, and one of the stake presidents said, I'm the new stake president. I've been in my assignment for 3 months, and I prayed about it, and the Lord told me nothing bad's going to happen in our stake. Took my breath away. True story. And I said, wow, A, I'm thankful you prayed about it. B, I'm thankful you got the message response that you got. But I want to tell you, if you're not a victim, you've got to be a resource for the other people that it did happen to. And that changed his whole approach, and now his stake is really active in getting the stake and its membership prepared. Another big misunderstanding, you're going to think when it happens all your loved ones are with you. More times than not, they're not with you. The husband's at work and can't get past the yellow tape. Your kids are somewhere in school, or the buses let them out, but you don't know where, and they're not with you. Another misunderstanding. All my good stuff that I've collected is going to be with me and available to me when the bad thing happens. Well, you got a heck of a first aid kit in your back of your car, your trunk of your car, or at your office, because most of the time you're not home when the bad things happen. You'll be able to phone for help, and you'll see my answer to that here in a minute. But that doesn't work whether you're dialing 911 or the church or other emergency organizations. You'll be able to get home to get what you need, not if the yellow tape is up. I remember an Area 70 in Colorado who was getting into almost a fist fight with an officer at the yellow tape saying, he was the Area 70 for that area. I have authority in that area. I've got to get in there and see what I can do to help my members. And they said, I'm sorry, if I don't know you and you're not in my book on the trusted side of the page, you're not getting in. Okay, another true story. You think that the government's going to bail you out, or the church is going to bail you out, or an NGO, non-governmental organization is going to bail you out. Doesn't work that way. I always used to rely on the church, because when we were in the middle of a tornado response and we needed things with the flood and we needed rubber boots and blankets and cots, I could call the welfare center in Temple Square, and they would ship a truck before sundown with that stuff to come out to Colorado to help us. And then COVID hit, and I called one of my friends down there when I saw the Bishop Storehouse in Cache County close, and said, he was a good friend of mine. I said, what's going on? Why are the canneries shutting down and the storehouses shutting down? He said, Bill, you wouldn't believe it. We don't have anything left on the shelves but a little bit of red winter wheat and a little bit of macaroni. The rest are bare. And I said, good grief, how can that possibly be? I've worked on church farms all over the U.S., and I know that they keep restocking the back of the Bishop Storehouse. And he said, well, with COVID, we can't get volunteers to plant, volunteers to pick, volunteers to box, volunteers to transport. So we're empty. And the press releases for the next 6 to 8 months were LDS Church donates $4 million to Idaho Food Bank, procure locally. LDS Church donates $10 million to Salvation Army to procure what they need. It was into the here's the money, find it on your own and use the money to pay for it. Reality is, first responders make up 1% of the population. If you're thinking the military, we got an Army National Guard guy in Don here. If you think the military is going to step in and fill that gap, they will try and they will help, but they're 1% more. So now you're looking at 2%. In New York City, I had a friend who was in emergency management there when Superstorm Sandy hit. And on day 3, I managed to get through to him, and he said, you wouldn't believe it, we've got over 1,000 people that have made calls to 911, and we can't get to them. We're on the to-do list that they had, they were 1,000 behind. I was in Texas when they had an interstate truckers strike, and within 72 hours the stores were empty, and you see pictures of it and you hear about it, but you don't quite believe it. But I went into a Safeway store in Dallas, I think it was, or Fort Worth, and there was nothing there but non-edibles, screwdriver kits and absorbent towels and a lot of other things that aren't way up high on your emergency list. Everything that you could possibly eat or cook, or vitamins even that you could take, was gone. Even the pet food was gone. There were a lot of people eating tuna fish, cat food, I think. Tucson, Arizona, when they had the senatorial event there in the parking lot, and there was an active shooter, the wounded took up every resource in Tucson, Arizona that would handle an emergency response to a shooting victim. All the hospitals, all the beds, all the emergency rooms, all the recovery rooms, etc., all of the equipment was taken up by that one event. Top-down doesn't work. As I mentioned before, outside help is 72 to 96 hours out. You should have a 96-hour kit, not a 72-hour kit's another way of saying that. And it takes a whole community to respond. And again, you're either going to be a casualty or a resource. What do you need to do to be ready? Make a plan, build a kit to support that plan, and stay informed. In order to make a plan, you have to know what your risks are. Is it going to be weather? Is it going to be the shakeout earthquake that we're 200 years past due on, or whatever the number that currently is? What is it that you have to worry about? If you're in the Bear River Valley, is it going to be flooding? If you're in the grassy plains, is it going to be wildfires? What about domino effects? Remember in Japan, Fukushima, they had an earthquake that created a tsunami that overflowed and knocked out the major nuclear power plant that they had, which then contaminated the area. So where was the disaster? Was it the earthquake? Was it the flood? Was it the reactor being scattered? And then there's these biological risks, chemicals, biological. I took the canning class here a little bit ago, and I kept thinking anthrax. I was given a presentation in Denver, Colorado, September 30th or something on a couple of years ago, and somebody said, isn't it great that we didn't have anything bad happen in our area on 9/11? And I said, how do you know? Everybody looked confused. I said, they could have taken a truckload of anthrax, let it throw the anthrax out the back of the truck up I-25 and then I-70 across Denver, and it would take you at least a week to 10 days before it got tracked, inhaled. The emergency rooms were starting to realize there was an outbreak or a pandemic of some kind. You'd be a week to 2 weeks into it before you even knew it happened. Same thing with dirty bombs and those kinds of things. Face of terrorism, you can't tell the face anymore because they're Swedish and they're Canadian and they're Middle Eastern, they're Oriental, they have all sizes, shapes, and colors. So make your plan. Have one for your family or you and your neighbors or your office. Make the critical decisions you need to make before the bad thing happens. And I have some handouts up here on the chair. Oops, sorry. That you can come get. One of them is for the sample family plan. It's a sample family, I call it. It's a card you can get laminated, and on one side it says, who are we, name, telephone numbers, etc., what's our allergies, what's our blood types, who's the family member outside our area where the landlines might still be working to connect because you can't connect locally because everything's overloaded. What's that number? Do we have any family members with ham radio or GMRS radios? What are their frequencies they're going to be on? What are the local critical numbers? Food poisoning, the hospital, American Red Cross, Sheriff's Department, et cetera. And the backside is, if we evacuate and have to go north, where can they come find us? If we got to go south, where would we be? If we're east or west, where are we at? That way grandma and grandpa know that their kids can come find them because they're going to know that you're at the Kohl's parking lot on the south side or the Smith's grocery store in Smithfield on the north side. And that's an important part. And all that information you can put together when your hair's not on fire at the kitchen table in probably 20 minutes, and then a little bit of time to laminate them. Put them in every glove compartment of your cars, every one of your grab-and-go bags, every one of your kids' lunch bags, and they know the important information. So when you're the deer in the headlights of the car, you know the only thing you got to remember is get my card, and all the other decisions you made are there. And there's samples up here for you. We talked about cell phones being your best tool or your worst tool. One note, FEMA found out that even when the towers are laying on their side or partially burned down or overloaded, text messaging data packets often go through. And so it became it became the go-to mechanism for FEMA in Joplin and other locations because it worked like a mesh network. This house that's flattened has a router that's still hooked up and working. It's picking up something from the tower, and the data packages could circulate and be used. So the cell phone still has value. Plus, you can put your first aid instructions and all sorts of other critical information on your cell phone as your library. Don will talk more about other ways to communicate, which are critical because we've got a responsibility again to get the word up the priesthood line. Are the members and missionaries of buildings, and laterally to emergency management, how many people need food, shelter, how many are injured, how many are critical. That's why I think you've probably seen these tags you put on your front door, green, yellow, and red. Green means we're okay. Yellow is put on there either by you saying, well, we got some problems, but we can manage them. I need the Relief Society or the Elders Quorum. Or if it's nobody home, when somebody comes to check, they put a yellow tag on it. The red ones are need urgent care immediately, first responder kind of care. Keep critical medical information handy, because if you lose everything and you're injured, they need your history. There's that form I talked about in the worksheet that you can pick up here. You make a kit, make one for you, your family, and your pets. It'll last you for 3 or 4 days. Each one of my cars has a big grab-and-go bag in it that's got my 72 hour kit, more in some cases. Remember to put water in those kits. You need a gallon a day per person, and you'd be surprised how many people have granola bars that are drier than heck and nothing to drink. Prepare at least 2 personal kits, one that you can grab and go with, and one small one to keep in the car all the time. If you go traveling, if I'm flying somewhere, I've got a small emergency kit, communications, first aid, critical information, other things that I put in that suitcase as well. You need them for the office. Update those. I found that my kids have gone in over the years. Every time you change your watches forward or back, go check the batteries and the stuff you have in your kits, because my sons would poach the tools and the batteries and everything else, and I went as law enforcement. I went and said my duty lamp was off. I said, I got more in the car. Went in there, all the batteries are gone, had another flashlight, thought I'm okay. Pushed the button, it didn't work because they'd taken the batteries out of that as well. How to be informed, a lot of different ways to do that. Don covers some of that, but social networks, internet links, some TV stations are on. Even you can get a little portable radio that'll pick up TV and radio, which are good. Be careful and listen for evacuation or shelter-in-place information. Code Red, all one word, is a good thing you can sign up for that'll give you cell phone immediate notices if something bad is happening in your area. And I know in Cache County, the government sends out Code Red alerts. It's software downloaded, free to use, not a big deal. Don't look up code space red. Look up Code Red, all one word, yeah, because the code space red, I had a guy in a crowded steak center tell me, excuse me, I looked at it and the only thing I can download is a menstrual cycle tracking program, which embarrassed the heck out of me, so I always tell people it's all one word. Have key maps and possible routes for evacuation. I rely on my cell phone so much I have a hard time remembering which of my 5 kids, what their telephone numbers are. I know a couple of them, but not all of them. If I got to find my way and I can't use Google Maps, I'm in trouble. So paper maps are good. Situational awareness, learn what the 8 signs of terrorism are. I used to be in law enforcement, and I taught terrorism awareness and reporting. Utah has a State Information Analysis Center, SIAC, that you can call anything that doesn't look or smell right, you call it in. They try to put the pieces together and see if there's something being planned or getting ready to happen. Here's a resource sheet that's up here on the chair you can get. Has critical telephone numbers, critical social networks, and what your Brigham City Police Department's incident webpage is, and those kinds of things. I'm going to skip quickly through this. I was part of the response to a 100-year flood in Colorado back in 2013. And we mobilized the church. By the way, we were 3% of the population. Yeah, we ponied up 8,000 volunteers who did 50,000 hours worth of cleanup for their neighbors and other people they'd never met, which was 17% of all the work that all the non-governmental organizations had done. And we provided $100,000 worth of truck stuff that was trucked in. And we helped Salvation Army and Catholic charities and all sorts of other NGOs. So recap, Provident Living is not the same as emergency preparedness. You see education and legal assistance and starting a business and other things that are all part of Provident Living, the welfare wheel. If you look at it as one little piece at the bottom called preparedness, that's huge when you add response and recovery. The risks are real and they can impact you. You need to be reliant, make simple kits, have tools. So why is it so hard? Why have the brethren been preaching it now for decades and there are people that just don't get prepared? And the excuses are, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, and other people are going to take care of me. You need to make it a priority. I'm going to finish with this slide. The brethren did a study about 7 years ago in Spanish Forks, where they went to the coordinating councils and had a survey of all the members in those coordinating councils of how much emergency preparedness things they had, and food in particular. Not a paper killing, not a tree killing exercise, as I call it, where you hand them out, you don't collect them, or you collect them and they go in a pile somewhere. They analyzed it. And to my shock, less than 2% of the members in Spanish Fork coordinating councils had a 1-year food supply. If you took everybody that had 2 weeks or more and put that in a pile, it would take care of another 15, or a total of 15% of all the members that live in Spanish Fork area. Okay? And it would last about 6 days for the members. We don't have a basement to store. We have a high groundwater. We don't have a room in our garage. We have to pay our debts off first. And one of the general authorities on the stand looked out and said, you say that you don't have the money to do this? I see a whole lot of new Apple telephones and Apple iPads out there. And I passed more 6- and 7-car garages on the way to your building than I'm used to seeing anywhere. So why is it you don't have room and you don't have money? And then the big question that they asked was, what's the church going to do to provide for us since we're so poorly prepared? There's a lot of laws of preparedness, as I call them, law of the harvest. You reap what you sow. Going through free agency, you're responsible for the consequences of your choices that you make, consecration, tithing, etc. This is a quick Johari window. It's a great way to look at things. I have the able on the top, yes or no, willing on the side. This was developed in Stanford, used it in the military and other situations. But if you were to look at this and say, who are the willing and able? If you go to that block where the willing is yes and the able is yes, they're the blessed ones. They're the ones who have gotten prepared for themselves and a little bit more for their neighbors in their community. So faithful and blessed goes in that block. Who are the ones that are willing but unable? The ones that are infirm, handicapped, unemployed, a variety of others that are willing. They'd do it if they could. They're just not in a position to do it. Those are the innocent poor, as they're called in the English law dictionary. And then you got the 2 blocks, or there's the quote from D&C, woe unto you, rich men, that will not give your substance to the poor, for the riches will canker your souls, and this shall be your lamentation in the day of visitation. So these are those who are not willing, and yes, they're able, and the no's are the ones that are addicted to free things and other people providing them. Another quote from that: "Woe unto you, poor men, whose hearts are not broken, whose spirits are not contrite, and whose bellies are not satisfied, and whose hands are not stayed from laying hold upon other men's goods." I'm just going to put these quotes up they basically start to tell you that the idle shall not eat the bread nor wear the garments of the laborer. You can't have emergency repentance to solve your problems. And I'm going to end with this parable of the 10 virgins. All the virgins knew what the law was when they had a big event and they were told to prepare for the coming of the bridegroom. They all had the ability to be faithful. They were able. Half made the decision not to prepare. They were unwilling. They tried to get the faithful virgins, the willing and able, to share their oil, but they would not, as they had no surplus, as it says in the scriptures. Key term. When the bridegroom came, did he chide the 5 wise virgins for not sharing their oil and let the 5 unwise virgins into the feast? If you go back and read that scripture, no, he closed the door on them. Okay? It was the Lord who closed the door and barred the unwise virgins from entering into the feast, leaving them to live with the consequences of their choices, to reap what they had sown, to go hungry. So if you're relying, or your neighbors are relying on the other neighbors taking care of me, I'm not going to worry about it. That's one that I use because that's stark and harsh, but it's exactly the way that works. I'll hand this off to Don. I'll put your slides up for you. Any questions out there for now? You can catch me afterwards too. I'll get business cards I can leave with you.
That was a treat. We were told as it is, and that's important. Okay, my name is Don Summit. My calling is one to help people with emergency communications, and I do that through the region of same area that Bill talked about, which is the Box Elder County, Cache area, up into southern Idaho, and down into Weber County. And I'm happy to do that. And so at the end of my presentation, if you have any questions or you want to talk about more technical things, because this is not a ham radio presentation. This is a presentation about communications. But if you want to talk about those kind of things, I'm happy to do that, and I'll give you my email that you're welcome to write me. I would give you my phone, but I can't answer that many phone calls sometimes, so happy to do it over email. That's fine, Bill. Okay, so just to start, my first slide is going to talk about why people deal with communications at all. Why is it an issue for you? Whenever I first started with communications kinds of things, it was my wife trying to get me to do more things with my sons. I have 7 boys. And my wife said, hey, there's this activity about ham radio. Why don't you go take the boys and do that? And then she regretted it because I really liked it. Okay, and so it became a hobby, and then it became something that I really enjoyed and I thought was very important, and I tried to help other people get involved in. And it's led to this. But my wife, she still had this response. She said, why do I care about you doing ham radio? She says, if we have an emergency, I'm going to use my cell phone. And sure enough, you should use your cell phone. That's the first thing you should use as long as it's working. But if it's not working, what's your next response? And if you look here, these are other things that people have talked to me about, and they've said, well, why do I want to learn anything about emergency communications? We communicate just fine in the United States. So like in our family, my wife, the one that she wants to talk to are the kids that live in town. She wants to talk to her mother. She wants to talk to her sister. Those things don't require a whole lot of emergency communications techniques that are different from everyday techniques. And then they're down at the bottom there. If you get into some hobbies or you start doing some of this and you enjoy it, it becomes a hobby, and then it starts costing money. And so I'm not here to talk about any of that, but I do have responses for all of those. And my main response is just what Bill talked about. If you want to be prepared for times when things that you normally use don't work, you need to think about that now, because you can't repent of that later. Resources are not available and the training is not there. And you can have some very nice equipment, for example, or somebody in your family or in your neighborhood can, but if you don't know how to use it, it's not a resource for you. So you have to learn how to use things and to take care of them. Okay, so let's talk about communications. Communications is a flow of information where it goes from a sender to a receiver, and oftentimes back from the receiver formulates an answer and sends it back to the person that asked the question the first time. And if you think about communications in that way, it helps you to understand that you need to be prepared for different scenarios or different things that you do. So what you really need to think about first, though, is what kind of information would you need to give to other people? You know, family, your family's going to want to know where you are, what you need, what your situation is. That's our natural response for people that we care about. Same thing at church, same thing for our neighbors or our community. And the important is to remember, whenever you answer a question, answer it completely. So you have to be prepared to give information that addresses the who, what, why, when, where, all that kind of thing. It's just not enough for your kids to call and say, we're okay. Well, what does that mean? You know, if you had a tornado, my sister-in-law, they lived through the Joplin, Missouri tornado that Bill described. It literally flattened a big part of town. And so we don't want to just know, you know, that they're okay. That's important. But what are your needs? You know, do you have a place to sleep tonight? Do you have any food? What's the church doing? Is the church doing anything? Is your neighborhood or is the community doing anything? And in that case, there were very few resources because they were all in town, and town wasn't there anymore. So you can, you know, you have to think about what other information people are going to need to be able to feel like they're helping you and meeting your needs. And then a second bullet there, what kind of information would you want to receive from others? Is help on the way? Is it not? And then what services or supplies would you need to receive or give, and how would you communicate those needs? I ask these same questions if I'm teaching a group like this, if I'm teaching priesthood leaders at church, if I'm teaching people in the community. I ask the same questions because the answers vary somewhat, but the issues are the same. So everyone needs to think in these terms when they're talking about emergencies, in my opinion. So these, I think, are some of your needs for information after an emergency. You have any comments about those? Any of those things seem more important to you? Yes, sir.
Sometimes locating your children, location.
Yeah, so Bill's response was, for him, it's often locating children, locating family members, locating pets, locating things that are important to you. Any others that are important to you or more important to you? Yes, sir.
I would want information to know if we have to avoid something that's coming our way.
That's a great point. Yes, sir.
If a tornado's right now in the next county, we know it's coming our way, we know not to go that way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the gentleman's question or response was that he wants to know what's coming our way or what the conditions are that are going to soon influence us. He wants to know about them now. And I'm actually from Oklahoma, and I grew up with the idea that everybody had a cellar, and if you didn't have a cellar, you knew where the cellar was. Because we would all watch the news, the siren would go off, and you'd look for the clouds, and we always generally knew what direction to look because the prevailing weather came from one direction. So we would get up, go look in that direction. If there's a cloud that way, you'd head for the cellar. That's what you did.
But different conditions, you know, if it's a heavy snowstorm, if it's a blizzard,
Yes, sir.
below freezing, and you can't get across certain places.
Sure. Or if you...
Information to make a good choice.
Yes, sir. And I'm just kind of summarizing because on the film, they're not going to hear you, I don't think. So, but the response also was for things like snowstorms, it's going to come and get you, and it's not always coming from the same direction. It's going to affect everyone, but you still need to know that it's coming, and you may not have access to a weather forecast, for example. Yes, sir.
Well, it depends an awful lot on what the situation is, because if it's winter, your shelter needs are gonna be a lot higher than if it's a warm summer day.
That's true.
And that sort of thing, so a lot of things will change according to what the circumstances are that we're in when the emergency actually happens.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's a great point. And then the point was that where we live here in Utah, the seasons are very different. So we have different needs in the summer as compared to winter, for example. Okay. Thank you for those comments. Those are wonderful. And then when you talk about communications to with your family, you're going to talk about cell phone, because everybody almost has a cell phone. My mother's 87. My mother-in-law's 87. She doesn't have a cell phone. My mother's 83. She does have a cell phone. And my mother's actually quite good with it. My mother-in-law is, technology is just not her thing. She didn't grow up with that. But we all have cell phones. Hopefully you know how to text. That's very important, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Bill already mentioned that. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, those kinds of things are ways to maintain contact and get information that are very well known. It's very important that we understand how to use those if we need those. Email, and then radio. You hear ads on the especially on AM radio these days. The Federal Communications Commission's asked if we think AM radio is still important. And some people have put together their resources and said, let's form a group that makes sure that everybody knows we still need to have AM radio. In Cache County, for example, KVNU is where you would go if you need to know emergency information. Here, I don't know what your local station is, but I know we can all get KSL.com or KSL radio and TV. And so that's where I would look if I was looking for emergency information as to one of those venues. Mark? Okay, very good. Okay, so Mark Millett will cover that in next hour, how they communicate, how Box Elder County communicates with residents of Box Elder County, which is extensive, as you know. It goes clear to Nevada. So you can't just use one. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Is there someone that this kind of, I don't live where my children are,
Yes, ma'am.
but they have somebody that they can communicate besides me to find out or whatever.
Yes, ma'am. That's a great point. And so the sister, she mentioned the fact that with elderly people, sometimes it's helpful to have a point of contact that family members can contact that's not the elderly family member. My mother-in-law, she would not be able to be reached by many of these methods because she's not technology literate. But she does have neighbors, and she does have friends, and she has a ministering sister that's very good. And that's who people would call to call her or to communicate with her. Is that what you meant, ma'am? Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I don't know how many people know this, but during a major disaster, you don't try to call into the disaster area. You let them call out.
That's a great point. We're going to talk more about that. So the brother said that during a disaster, it's best not to try to call into the disaster because they probably won't be able to get your call. Let them call you, call out to you, because they will do that as the resources become available. Is that okay? Okay. Okay, so but email, and then you have radio. I've also written down there some other things we're going to look at a slide with later, but there's different kinds of communications methods that depend on radios. And when you talk about radios, people think that it's a ham set that's in your basement and you have this big, huge boom antenna on top of the, on top of the roof or the tree height, and it's not necessarily that. But there are other technologies that use radios, including CB radio, which years ago everybody had a CB radio. Those still are valid. They still work. Yes, sir.
About a year and a half ago, FCC approved the format for FM on CB, which is a lot clearer than the AM.
Yes, sir.
Still the same power.
You bet. Well, and CB radio has some limitations, which one of those is the clarity of the message that the truckers used to use. You had to be pretty much a trucker with an ear tuned to that to understand what they were talking about. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. My ham radio would be, because I have a 55-gallon drum with my ham radios duplicated in the drum. And if you take a drum or a metal container and you line it with something that allows it to be insulated from the metal, that's called a Faraday cage. And a Faraday cage is very effective at shielding from EMPs for those kind of devices. I live in North Logan. You're welcome to come, and if you need me here, I'll come here. But yes, sir.
Say for communications in particular, if you've got an old microwave oven,
Yeah.
don't throw it away. Take the power cord off of it, wrap your handsets, put them in there and all the precious electronics you want to work. Because that acts as a Faraday cage this big. And that way anybody that protected their radio, you'd still be able to communicate with your radio. Protected asset.
Okay. So brother said that one of the easy ways to make what they would call a Faraday cage is to use an old microwave oven. And that's, of course, very effective because we know that the microwaves don't come out, therefore they also wouldn't go back in. Yes, sir? Yes, sir, awesome. Another suggestion, an old refrigerator would make an awesome Faraday cage, and it's much bigger than a microwave. Yes, ma'am, or yes, sir? A gun safe is okay. What you don't want to do is have that metal touch the item that you're trying to save, because the metal acts as an antenna. It's the insulation that you need. There's a layer of insulation to make sure that the electronic device doesn't get that electrical pulse. Yes, ma'am. Faraday was a fellow, he was a scientist back in the late 1800s, and Faraday learned a lot about radiation. And I could talk to your ear off about that, but I won't do it now. But it was a gentleman, Michael Faraday.
Yeah, EMP is electromagnetic pulse. So it's the invisible electromagnetic pulse that imputes current through wires and other metal items. And that's why you have to break that.
Yes, the insulation is a really critical part there. You just don't let the radiation go through. If you have insulation with no metal, it goes through the insulation and ruins your device. If you have the metal without the insulation, it collects the pulse and actually transmits it to your device. So, yes, sir.
Just a little more explanation for those who might not have heard of an EMP. It's a weapon type system that they anticipate might be used against us that will wipe out all of our electronics, including the electronics that run our cars and so on. It's a weapon system.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. So the comment was that an EMP is a weapon, basically. It's created by things like nuclear blasts, or the sun creates things that act like those as well. Sometimes you'll hear about large solar flares. Those will also knock out electronics and burn things up that are electronic. Yes, sir. The landline's probably fine, but the devices hooked up to the landline don't work anymore because they burn up. Because the landline acts as the wire acts as a large antenna collecting that pulse. Yes, sir. Landline is a valuable alternative. It doesn't have all the features that people are used to using with cell phones. Absolutely. And the point is to get information to people that need it and for them to send information that you need. Yes, sir. That's true. Most landlines these days aren't landlines anymore, actually. They're actually voice over internet protocol kinds of devices, which actually are not going to work very well, probably. The old-fashioned landlines would work fine, and the circuitry in those is much more rugged than what you have in a cell phone or some other more modern device. Yeah, don't throw away yeah. Our grandkids play with them at our house. They're not useful anymore, but. Okay, other comments? I appreciate the comments because those are the things that you have questions about, and that's what I'd like to do is answer your questions. Okay, so all of these issues are important. I believe that if you think about it, you'll realize that your family has a need for all those pieces of information and probably more. But that's just trying to tell you that emergency communications are important for you. I'm sorry? Okay. All right, so, sorry, that went the wrong direction. Okay, and you have needs to communicate with people at church as well. I think you can think those through as well. Okay, I put this slide in because like in my family, we have elderly members of my family that don't know how to use all these devices and all these methods. My kids, they're awesome. My brothers and sisters and my uncles and aunts and my parents, not so much. But all the way down to that GPS text messaging, there are devices that actually will use satellite technology to send your messages if you need those. I can talk about those another time, but I have stories about how those have helped people during times when the other methods didn't work. And then bandwidth. Bandwidth is what Bill was talking about with texting. If you call somebody on your cell phone and you talk about bandwidth, well, the message in terms of bandwidth is this big. The message is that big. It needs a pipe that big. Text messaging is about that big. And text messaging will get through when the big messages, your voice messages won't, or your big data messages or other kinds of things that relatively are big in bandwidth terms, they won't get through. But a text message will go in the text or in the cell phone system, it will go and sit and will queue. It will sit there until there's a space this small in between the big messages. In between those big messages, there are often little spaces. And so text messages will get through when big messages like voice phones will not. Yes, sir.
A real life example of that, my phone, whenever you see what it is, I slid off the road on the way to deliver some salt, of all things, on the ice of Wyoming. And the truck wasn't damaged. As it turned out, when they pulled it back out, I had to turn off the pet truck on the air tank and drive it away. But I was out in a snowfield, and the truck was literally not touching the ground. It was, I don't know if you've done that, but you can snow sled on top of it.
Yes, sir.
I was sitting there, no wheels touching the ground, with about 120,000 pounds of vehicle and salt. And I tried to call, and it would it would dial a number,
Right.
but nothing would happen. Once in a while, if I got it turned just right, they actually knew I was calling because they would answer. But as soon as they answered, the need for that bandwidth was so high that we lost the connection. So what I did was then I went to text and started texting. And here I am in a place where I couldn't call somebody sitting across the street because that's not how cell phones work. And so I texted to the people I was leased to, and they called the tow truck. And the tow truck communicated with them, they texted back to me, and we coordinated the entire bit, so we had the right tow equipment and everything there. They pulled me back up on the road. But I was able to do that only, I mean, just normal. There was no emergency other than mine, but I still had to use text. So when you can't get that signal through, go to text and you'll get good.
I appreciate that. So the brother gave everyone a story here, an example of when he got trapped. It wasn't even an emergency, and his cell phone wouldn't work, but the texting did, and it saved him a lot of time, and inconvenience, and possibly his load and his job and his life. So you never know. Okay, thank you. Okay, so radio communications. You think of radios as being something that's fancy, like I talked about before. Radios, there are a lot of different kinds of radios. They have a lot of different uses, and this is not a ham radio presentation. If you want that, let Brother Bay know. He'll get us come back to that, and we can talk about that and help you become qualified and learn how to use those and make those a useful tool for you, but we're not going to talk about those today. But if you look at this line of things, basically you have everything from CB radio, which many of us are familiar with, to walkie-talkies, to ham radio, and then to satellite phones. You think of a satellite phone as being something that's not a radio? Sure it is. Even your remote, when you go home and hit the little button and it opens your garage door, that's a radio. You just used a radio. You're surrounded by them. So don't think there's something complicated or you can't use, because you use them all the time, okay? All right, and these are just different pictures of those. I would encourage you to think of things in terms of PACE, and PACE is an acronym, and it stands for, over on the left-hand side there, you'll see, and up on the very top, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. So in emergency communications, you need to think about those bottom two lines. Primary, we all use a cell phone. We all text. And with an alternate means, which means if the cell phone's not working, you would use a landline or a VoIP phone. And you would also use email instead of a text. But in contingency, when the power doesn't work or when things aren't, you have something going on, like a big flood or something that would cause you not to be able to use those two methods, then you'd have a contingent need. And that's when you might use those other methods there. And then in an emergency, it's when you need stuff communicated right now. People's lives are, or their eyesight, or their losing a limb is a possibility. If they can't get the message through right now, that's a bad thing. So you can think about your communications in those terms, and that will help you to become better prepared. So I encourage you to think about that. And then there's a really nice brochure online to create a family emergency communications plan. Bill, actually, this is, I think, is probably one of his resources that he would refer you to as well. And the key points are there to collect information, which he did talk about, sharing it with everyone so everyone knows what your contacts are. And his little basic plan here is a very good resource. I encourage you, if you have time, just swing by here by this chair and collect that. And then,
Wording for the Red Cross. One of the things the Red Cross does online is you can say we're in this disaster and our name is and we're safe and our 3 kids are with us. And they put it in a database so people kind of find out how you are.
okay.
Through the Red Cross to see your name and status.
Okay, so the brother's point was that the Red Cross can help you sometimes with if you know how to contact them, and they have a database they can put your information in so that if others inquire about people in Box Elder County, or my family's safe, they live in Box Elder County, Utah, they can look at the Box Elder list, and if you're on that list, they can say, yeah, they reported in, they're safe. That is a resource for you. Thank you very much, Bill. And I apologize, I'm going through because I think I'm already out of time, which is okay because we had comments, and that's even more important. Okay, and so we could talk about information to collect. This is in that brochure. So if you just think about things that you want to collect, there's everything from household information, which Bill has on his thing here, down to pet information and utilities. Those are all very important pieces of information. And in summary, these are things that I talked with you about. Who do you want to communicate with? Who do you need to get information from? What resources might you need? And then how would you intend to get those messages under the primary, contingent, emergent kinds of situations? And then how could you make a plan? And the key is that with any plan, if you don't rehearse it, you don't know if it works. And so from time to time, you have to rehearse your plan and take your equipment out and make sure the batteries are still good or they're still there, that nobody took them. So the last thing is, if you would like more information about this kind of stuff, let Brother Bay know. Or if, I'm not sure, Jim, is this your stake? This is David's stake. Okay. All right. So Brother Bay would be able to.
Jim and I are both on
Okay. Brother Buchanan is too. Okay. Very good. Okay. Are there any other questions? I'd be happy to address other questions. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention.
Let's give them a round of applause. They've provided a lot of good information.